delegations and announcements, and we have Darlene Malaiko. She's already up and waiting to go. So welcome, Darlene. You're speaking, I think, on, well, obviously on the transit services.
Yes.
All right. So I assume our legislative assistant or officer let you know that you have 5 minutes to speak.
I didn't get anything except for just the invite from Zoom, but I think it'll be less than 5 minutes. Yes.
Okay, so 5 minutes is all we really can allow in our policies. Yep. So you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, good afternoon, Mayor Herron and councillors. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you directly. My name is Darlene Malaiko, and I represent the Amalgamated Transit Union and the people who operate the buses on St. Albert's Transit Service. Today, I'd like to address you on 3 separate but connected issues. The first one is the service reductions. Currently, we're providing a summer level of service that is regular service, less the school and university work. It is proposed to move to a lower level of service, deemed modified workday service, I believe, with regular Saturday and Sunday. We feel it's important to keep the service level at or above the modified weekday service for the following reasons. Many St. Albert citizens rely on public transit to get them to their daily needed services like grocery shopping, medications, and appointments. And the people of St. Albert rely on transit to take them to work at essential service locations in St. Albert and in the Edmonton area. So they go to grocery stores, hospitals, doctors' offices, pharmacies, banks, restaurants, etc. Part of the modified weekday service includes handy bus service. And we think that's really important because it's an essential service that takes people without any other means of transportation to vital life-supporting venues like dialysis and other treatments and specialists. Saturday and Sunday service should not be reduced from the current levels, as these levels just meet the needs in these challenging times. There's only 10 buses out on a Saturday, always. With regular service. So the second issue, we'd like to see safety shields installed in all buses. This apparatus is readily available off-the-shelf technology. It has the capacity to save operators from brutal attacks like we've seen in other properties and from viral attacks like the COVID-19. As we move forward with regional transit, these shields will be even more necessary. Other properties across the country are implementing and installing these devices to aid in the security of operators. The cost of these barriers is not prohibitive, and in any event, it is much less than the cost of a life. And my third issue is the COVID safety measures. St. Albert has a high incidence of the virus. So we need to be proactive with safety. We're asking that the city contribute to the supply of safety equipment for transit operators. We need disinfectant, gloves, masks. We have none of these at this point. The city can likely source these products more readily than the contractor, and it's appropriate that the city should contribute to these costs. Cleaning and disinfecting of buses is not sufficient. The city has purchased 3 NOCO spray foggers, and they're not being used on the buses at all. The NOCO spray disinfectant should be used on every bus every day to protect operators and riders and the general public. Operators come into contact with hundreds of people during a shift. I mean, not every shift, but many shifts we do. The stats that we see, that you see, are only those passengers that are leaving St. Albert or coming back into St. Albert. So if I'm driving a 205, for example, and I leave with 5 people, and I pick up 5 more, and I pick up 5 more, and I pick up 5 more, those passengers aren't being reflected on our count sheets. So
30 more seconds, Darlene.
Okay,
thanks.
So disinfecting and cleaning the buses can happen during peak hours, and we need to mandate center door boarding immediately and close seats. Some of this has begun, but we need to be more proactive about it and get it happening. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you actually so much for coming. There's probably some questions. I see Councillor Watkins has some. I'm just gonna let you know that the entire agenda is about transit. So once we're done this section of the agenda with your presentation, I would encourage you to then jump onto the YouTube Live. So you continue to watch, because some of the questions might come not directed to you, but they might come directed to our staff to get the answers that we're looking for. So it's awkward, but that's probably the best way that we can flow this from your perspective. Is we'll ask a few questions of you now, and then when that's all done, we will we'll go to staff, and you'll be removed from this meeting, and you can watch the rest on our YouTube Live channel. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, I saw Councillor Watkins had his hand up, so go ahead, Ray.
Yes, you said that we should be implementing central door boarding and closed seats. What are closed?
Closing seats are putting signs up on the seats, so that people don't sit on those seats, so that they practice social distancing. Not everybody does practice social distancing. Many of the people that are getting on are homeless people. So if there's something on the seat, they'll sit somewhere else. Especially right now, all the shelters and places like libraries are closed. So people are downtown waiting to get on a bus. And yeah, we need to help them practice social distancing.
Okay, and then secondly, you said that foggers are not being used on the buses?
Not at this time, no.
Okay.
And they're high use. Like, I mean, they get a lot of, like I said, if 55, 60 people sometimes are on like Friday, for example, it's an easy day. And we had 55 people on that bus over the course of a day.
Maybe I was mistaken, but I could ask the administration, but I thought that we had bought those things to sanitize the buses.
Not being used on buses at this time.
I misunderstood that, what we bought them for. Okay, thank you.
Ray, I think they're mostly being used in the ambulances.
Oh, okay.
But you can ask that question, but that's a good one. Okay, I saw Councillor Hansen's hand go up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks a lot for coming today, Darlene. I had some questions around the numbers. You said early on in your presentation that there were still many people relying on the uses of our transit system, and that we should not reduce our service levels at this time.
Well, not below the modified level. It's at summer, so not below modified. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I just our transit people are saying that our numbers are significantly down, not unlike other municipalities during this time. So I'm trying to understand where you think the discrepancies lie in terms of our ridership. And I know you talked about picking up 5 people and then picking up 5 people, and you said that those are not in our counts. So I'm trying to reconcile in my mind what numbers we're actually talking about in terms of ridership. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Certainly our ridership is down, but there are still people that need to go to the grocery store. We still need to provide a service to those people. And if there's like if we have a bus with, let's say, a 60 passenger, 40 passenger bus, and we have 5 people on with social distancing, that's an adequate size of a bus. And regular service to the store, to the grocery stores, and it needs to be continued. Our ridership is down, it's definitely down. But we want to see less people riding the buses, but we also want them to be able to get to their appointments and their stores and pharmacies and work.
Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hansen. Councillor Jolly.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Darlene. My question is about the PPE requests, so masks and gloves. I'm just curious to know why those are being requested, just in terms of, I know gloves are it's not for protecting the user, it's for protecting from cross-contamination, and masks, same thing, would only, I mean, aren't intended to be used to protect the person wearing them. So I'm just curious to know, I guess, what the reasons behind that request.
Well, Well, we're wiping off our buses in, you know, if I get people on that are coughing, I'm using my own equipment to wipe the rails and things so that other people don't get infected with, you know, whatever. Yeah, we don't have masks. Weeks ago, most transit properties across the country are wearing masks, and many of them are wearing gloves. You know, it might have been strange a couple of weeks ago to see operators with them on, but almost everywhere they are using them.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the intended purpose is, though, of wearing those.
To prevent, like if I'm coming into contact with 55 people, I could be a carrier. I could be spreading the disease until I have symptoms. So it's a protective measure.
Okay, I think I must be misunderstanding, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
All right, so Darlene, we did, my biggest question to you is kind of trying to deviate between what is the city's responsibility and what is our contractor as the employer of the bus driver. So we got an email or a letter asking for 10 different provisions to be made, and all of the ones that are essentially within the city's purview. So recommending the personal protective equipment would be responsibility of the employer, pandemic leave is employer, compensating workers as employer. The rear door entry is something the city can do, and we have done.
It just, today I just saw some of it started, yeah.
Yeah, so we have done rear door entry and fare elimination to support the physical distancing. We've had strategic continuation of service to avoid overcrowding and limitations of bus passengers. But those are the three that are city related that we actually have done. And I've heard, and I have pictures somewhere, I wish I could share them with you, that we've taped off the front of the buses. So you enter on the rear and the passengers can't even get close to the bus driver. Is that correct?
Today, there were some chain across. Yes, there's no tape. There's just a chain, a plastic chain across, and the seats are up, and we are using rear door entry. The drivers have been doing that for weeks on their own, but I did see today that there's a chain. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Any more questions for Darlene? Okay, I'm seeing no more council questions. So Darlene, thanks for joining us. And if you have a problem linking over to the YouTube channel, just send our ledge officer an email, but I think it should work pretty quick.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Have a good afternoon.
All right. Okay. So we're on to agenda item number 3, council, which is adoption of the agenda. At agenda planning about an hour ago, Ken and Ray and Kevin and I had a quick conversation about our April 20th meeting. It's a quite a long one, and so we were hoping we could start at 2. So Ken's ready to.
I started
noon. Sorry, noon instead of 2. But Mr. LaFleur, pointed out rightfully that we actually have a council motion at the beginning at the org meeting that we start at 2. So I need a council motion to start at noon. So Ken's willing to put that on the floor. And so we're going to add that to the agenda as an emergent item after business items. So saying that, and you can vote against it if you don't want to start at noon, but saying that, we're going to add it to the agenda. And Councillor Mackay, do you want to make a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So everyone understand that change?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor as amended? That is unanimous. All right. Now we're moving on to the meat, which is a temporary reduction of transit service levels. And Mr. Lake, I see you there.
Good afternoon, Council. So St. Albert Transit brings forward the following recommendation that as of April 27th, 2020, transit operations convert to a modified transit schedule for weekday operations, similar to our weekend and holiday schedule. Secondly, that transit administration monitor their ridership and report these statistics to the Emergency Operations Center on a weekly basis to gauge opportunities to resume conventional scheduling. So as indicated earlier through various emails, et cetera, and indeed the presentation, our transit ridership has declined down to about 10 to 15% of regular use since the onset of COVID-19 and the stay-at-home recommendations from the province. So it's our intention to basically convert the service to what would normally be considered a weekend service. We have provided in your council package the implications of the recommendation. A modified weekly service is a lower level of service than a standard weekday, but improved over Saturdays. It's generally, in the past, we've used it over Christmas and Easter when there's still unemployment, but university students and fewer workers are requiring transportation. So the primary differences are the current weekday service is a 15-minute interval on peak, and then an hourly midday service with express or limited stop routes to downtown Edmonton. And the peak hour routes are shorter because we're trying to connect with 15-minute frequencies for the commuters. And then the first departure is downtown at 5:30 a.m. With the revised service that we're proposing, basically it would be a 30-minute peak service and then hourly midday service. Non-express service maintained to key destinations in downtown and West Edmonton. So unfortunately not as interruption free. There'll be more stops, but the route remains the same. And there'll be no evening or night Kingsway service. And our bus leaving, the earliest bus leaving for downtown will be 5:45 in the morning. So this is similar to, this recommended service is similar to what Strathcona County and indeed the City of Edmonton has implemented back March 24th for Strathcona, March 17th for the City of Edmonton. There are no reductions anticipated for Saturday or Sunday at this time. So overall, if indeed council was to entertain these recommendations and approve them, we'd be looking at a reduction of costs of around $45,000 a week for the duration of the reduced service. It is expected that, as in all transit operations, should any particular individuals have challenges, that we would expect them to get in contact with our customer service people, and we would do our best to accommodate that request with one-off circumstances or special considerations, depending on what the request was. So it isn't a be-all and end-all. We can typically accommodate most unique circumstances. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
Okay, Wes sent me a message in the chat that he wants to ask a question. I saw Natalie's hand go up. So Wes and Natalie, and then we'll just take it from there. Go ahead, Wes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you to Mr. Lake. The implications of this reduction, how many staff are we talking about in terms of layoffs?
So Councillor Broadhead, we don't use those metrics from St. Albert perspective. The contractors deploy their personnel as they see fit. So it's approximately 100-hour per week reduction in the requirement of contractors. How they sort that out between their operators, because they all bid on various shifts, would be the purview of the contractor.
Fair enough, and I get that, but we're the ones making the decision not to spend the money. So the downstream implication is that somebody is not going to be working. So just was hoping to have some sort of understanding of the magnitude of the decision we're making. Secondly, our decision to forego fares. Are we having a problem with people camping on the bus?
Not to my knowledge, it's not been brought up to us before.
Okay. Yeah, I suspect the problem would be more prevalent in the city core like Edmonton, but just a question whether it was happening or not. I appreciate the motion before us. I don't know how we get around this when there's nobody riding the bus for very good reasons. So anyway, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Welcome, Councillor Broadhead. That's a good question. I did talk to Don Iveson, and Yeah, so they have day programming at Expo for some of the homeless, and then they do leave the day programming and they get on the bus and ride with no destination. So it is a significant issue, but good to hear it's not in St. Albert.
Yeah.
Natalie, I think you're next. And then
Thank
Jackie.
you. My first question, so you'll be monitoring use and then reporting back to kind of everyone who needs to know. Will that include complaints from users who are having trouble reaching their destination? Is that something that's part of that plan?
We will provide you basically an overview of the impact of the changes and the requests that we may not have been able to accommodate, and certainly give you an update on the things that we have had to do to accommodate any individual circumstances.
Okay, thank you. And regarding the service to Nate in Kingsway, I guess I don't know the routes really well, but are we seeing that route being used a lot by nurses, really? I mean, going to the ALEC. I know I have friends who bus to the ALEC. I'm from St. Albert. So are we going to be cutting off the transportation option for those people?
Yeah, unfortunately, Councillor Jolly, we don't have a sort of a breakdown of work types. Dustin, do you have a specific comment?
Yeah, so the Route 201 will still be available and provides access to the Royal Alex, just at a different door than the Route 202 does, but the service is still there and available to use.
That's fantastic to know. Thank you. And also, I'm sure it has been considered, but why is this recommendation being made, say, instead of having dial-a-bus options during kind of the midday non-peak hours? If you could comment on.
I can comment on that. So currently our dial-a-bus, it handles, each dial-a-bus handles a certain section of the city. And at this time, we only have 2 to 3 phones to cover it. So even though the ridership may be lower than usual, it's also the spread of the city for the 2 buses to cover. So dial-a-bus would be overwhelmed by it, and dial-a-bus does operate on a very fixed schedule of hourly service. So we want to provide that half-hour service. The fixed route is what we need to provide that.
Okay, and I guess this is probably to Mr. Scoble. We're not being prevented from going to a dial-bus option because of phone lines, are we? I assume that's a problem that we could fix if that was a better solution than anything.
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll defer to Tony if what our call volume or what our call capability is.
No, it's not simply a matter of phones. It's the bus assignments and then the intention to try and connect back for that 30-minute rotation that doesn't always work with the dial-a-bus.
So we could scale up if that was a better option than kind of running empty buses just on a fixed schedule then.
There is a potential to review increased on-demand services to reduce fixed route services in the future. It's a more complicated service reduction than we are currently proposing, but we could certainly look at that as the next level of review.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
All right, I think I have Councillor Hanson and then Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple of questions, a little bit along the lines of Councillor Jolly. For the specific essential workers or people who are, I don't know, with complex lives and situations, is there any partnering with ride sharing? I mean, are our taxis or our ride sharing services, are they even operational? I feel like I haven't seen any of them on the road. And can we partner with them when there is a need? So
Councillor Hanson, we have done in the past, partnered with other agencies to provide transportation. However, I think that the primary differences with our service reduction is frequency. It's not so much routes or destinations, it's more about frequencies. So with some cooperation from our riders in terms of pre-planning their trips, maybe slightly more deliberately than they had in the past, they should be able to achieve the same travel patterns as they have in previous schedules. So And those that can't, for whatever reason, those are the ones that we would encourage to contact transit, and we'll work with them to see what we can do to try and remedy the situation.
I appreciate that. So I guess, will there be literally less buses on the road? Would you be actually trying to reduce the buses that are on the road so that we can actually park some, so that we've only got some that are, I guess, for lack of better words, exposed? Or is it the same number, just in more infrequent?
Well, because it's a decrease in frequency, we would have a greater opportunity for spare capacity. So yeah, there is potential to take some out of service. But based on our compliance with the AH&S guidelines, all of our buses are cleaned appropriately, and we have no issues with providing any of our fleet at this time based on the guidelines that we're following.
I appreciate that. That was going to be one of my questions around the cleaning. Tony, will there be more? I know we have a reduction in riders, but will there be more riders using on these buses because they're running more infrequently? And is there any potential, any difficulty in the physical distancing situation? And can we maybe accommodate that by closing off some seats?
So indeed, we do expect there to be some increase in the number of people on a single bus, but we maintain our commitment to the 50% capacity and the distancing measures that we've incorporated. We talked a little bit earlier about rear entry boarding. We have, as of today, all buses will be rear entry boarding. We've got signs on every bus. We've got delineators separating the driver from the back of the bus. We have the front of the seats all tipped up. So essentially the front of the bus is out of bounds for 99% of the passengers. On occasion that a special needs user may need the front door access, we can then open that up. But even with that, there would still be a 2-meter distancing achievement within the way we currently have it set up. So all buses are rear entry, all buses are sectioned off. We maintain a commitment of 50% capacity to make sure that that distancing can be achieved. In the event that there's a recurrence of any incident where more people are required to be on a bus, we will get an extra bus down there for that route to take care of that so that we can maintain our 50% policy.
And so have we noticed at all that our drivers have to be, I don't want to use, well, they have to be forthright in reminding people to maintain their physical distancing? Is there a messaging system on the buses to remind people to remain physically? We hear it in grocery stores, et cetera. So I wondered if we had it on transit.
As of today, all of the transit buses have signs hanging on that chain, is encouraging signs. On each door is a sign for distancing, et cetera. You heard earlier that we had basically transitioned into rear door loading. That's because we were reluctant to rear door load until our snow piles at the bus stops were manageable. Once we got to the point of we were commissioned to remove all the snow piles, and we made effective basically all buses, all operations, rear entry as of today. So it's the full measure that we can implement at this time.
Excellent. And my last question really has to do with this, I'm going to call it plexiglass. That might not be what it is, but what is our role in that as opposed to the contractor's role? Is this something that cities are doing or contractors are doing, or is it mandated? Do you think, is there any noise that it will be mandated? All of those questions I have, and kind of rolls back to my question with having less buses on the road, so that we don't have to outfit everything if that ends up being something that we must do.
So at this stage, from a COVID response perspective, the Canadian Urban Transit Association and indeed the ATU union in their expressions of mitigation for COVID, screens are not part of that process. The screens referred to have been primarily installed basically for prevention of criminal activity toward the driver, which has been experienced in other jurisdictions, has not been experienced in St. Albert. And indeed, we have not contemplated moving toward that. The responsibility for it would be the asset owner. And in our situation, we are the asset owner. So should it become legislated, it would be something that we would need to incorporate within our budget process.
Thank you very much for answering my questions. That's all I have.
And can I just ask Mr. Lake on that question? And I apologize if this has come up already. Have we priced that out per bus, what those shields would cost?
We have priced out the buses based on our neighbors' experience, and it's $12,500 per bus. And that's broken up between two major components, and that's one, the physical separation itself, and then secondly, a unique air conditioning unit that needs to be provided because we've enclosed the driver into a semi-confined space. So those two things together are $12,500 from a US funds, by the way, I should add. And at this point, it's a 12-week minimum for parts, and contractor availability is unknown at this time. I can tell you that our friends to the south, the city of Edmonton, is still waiting for 400 units to be installed. So there is some logistics challenges, even if it was a mandated requirement.
Okay, so, because it was said that they were readily available and not cost prohibitive. So what you just told me is not readily available. And to me, we have what, 50 buses, 51, something like that?
We probably have 70. Yeah,
70, there you go, times $12,000.
right.
And that would be more for the safety.
America.
Thank you. More for safety than COVID related. So this is
That's
probably a wave of the future, but not maybe, okay. I'm not gonna put my opinion on that right now. All right, I had, you're done, Jackie? Yes, okay. So I have Councillor Mackay and then Councillor Watkins. Go ahead.
Most of my questions have been asked already. Thank you very much, everyone. Maybe, I'm not sure, Mr. Lake, or if it's Dustin that can answer this, but we talk about 10%, 15%. What's that in actual numbers? Do we know?
Dustin?
Yes. So I mean, so based upon, let's look here at, so compared to say April 6th, we normally have about 3,500 rides, and on a regular weekday we're about 360 to 350.
And do we know what routes are mainly the ride? I mean, I'm assuming that many are still using the bus to go into Edmonton for work or other things. You said we don't really track what they're going to. So I'm assuming majority of them are still moving, of that number are going into Edmonton, or is that total ridership around?
So the numbers that we're reporting, they're passengers on our commuter buses as they leave and enter Edmonton. So all the riders getting on and off within Edmonton, they are not recorded, and local ridership is not recorded on a daily basis. Those numbers are based off entering and leaving St. Albert.
All right, so the vast majority. So I mean, potentially the loops that we use in relation to this, are they picking up a large number of passengers?
You mean local routes?
Yeah.
They are feeder routes. I can't comment exactly on a day-to-day basis how well they're being used, but the feeder routes are as essential as the commuters. It's a whole holistic system.
The reason I asked that question is I mean, how many people are actually still driving their cars to the transit centers and then taking the bus into Edmonton to commute, or are they taking advantage of the less traffic on the roads and free parking in Edmonton as well and driving into Edmonton, or are they actually parking at the transit centers?
I believe the park and rides have had quite a bit of vacancy. We haven't had the struggles, primarily with university not being in session. There's quite a bit of parking space still available at the park and rides.
So we don't, so in the earlier comments that we had from Darlene, you know, she was saying the bus services in St. Albert are essential for grocery shopping, other types of shopping and work. What I'm trying to maybe try and ascertain is how many of them are actually riding just to take the bus into Edmonton, and is there picking up maybe on something that Councillor Hansen's saying, is there a better way of getting them to maybe the transit centers and getting them into Edmonton versus having the buses run the loops?
Well, and also we have a number of stores in St. Albert that are considered essential services: Costco, Surgeon Hospital, the grocery stores. We have workers who are also traveling to those destinations to stock the shelves.
So we do track that, Dustin. We know that there are people that are accessing our transit to get into businesses in St. Albert.
Erin Ridge North is a heavy usage of transit.
All right. Okay. I think most of the other questions are asked, but thank you very much.
Councillor Watkins, you're up.
Thanks. My questions are around the cleaning of the buses. Darlene was indicated that we weren't using the foggers on the buses, and she made comments about bus drivers cleaning buses themselves internally. Maybe you could comment on that and comment about how we are currently cleaning the buses and if we are or are not using the foggers.
So Councillor Watkins, the use of foggers is limited to an understanding of a positive COVID situation. And in that case, we would bring the foggers in to take care of it if indeed we had a known situation. So at this point, we haven't had any confirmed cases. So the cleaning routines that we've incorporated have been as described by Alberta Health Services, and we are documenting them through Intellex from a hazard assessment perspective. So we document the process, we provide photographs, and they're all stored in our emergency management folders for access for documentation through the COVID response. So we are formally following all protocols from a cleaning perspective with the buses.
And and what about bus drivers cleaning buses themselves? Is that just somebody taking it upon themselves to clean up something that they thought could be somebody who's sick or something? Like,
So indeed,
gloves, needing gloves because bus drivers clean up the buses sometimes.
so that sounds like a personal preference that the operators may take. Indeed, the city of St. Albert has provided our contractor, even though it's their responsibility to provide their staff the PPEs. We have backfilled some of their stock from ours because, like everybody, they're having difficulty getting supplies.
Yes.
So we have provided them with supplies, and how they roll them out, et cetera, is of course their responsibility with their staff. So.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, Natalie, you have another question? And then Sheena, okay.
Yeah, just really quickly about the foggers. So I know that we kind of jumped on that before most people, so we were able to get more foggers, I think, than most municipalities. But I'm curious to know if we have kind of an unlimited supply of the product needed to use them, or if we're having to prioritize use to make sure that kind of we're hitting the highest risk areas.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not able to comment on the foggers. The foggers are being maintained through the Emergency Management Center at this point. So,
and that might be more of a comment for a different meeting. But I'm curious too about why we're not routinely using them on buses, for example, and I think that might address.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Mr. Cole, if you could comment on that.
You want
to? Sorry, you asked me, we can comment on why we're not using them?
Well, just if we have like an unlimited supply of whatever product we need for the foggers, and or if there's a cost associated with that.
We'll follow up and check that out. But as Tony said, it's through the EOC, and they mainly are for the COVID responses, mainly for our first responders when they go out to a potential COVID call. So
Yeah, and that makes sense to me.
We were fortunate to pre-order them ahead of time. Many municipalities are having trouble getting them now. As to with the compound that's used, I'm not sure of the availability of that, but we'll take that away and provide council with that information.
Mhm.
All right. Is that all you had, Councillor Jolly? All right, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. I had one quick question about the safety plexiglass thing. So have we had any discussions about if we go to regional transit, which looks like we're going that way, and our buses are going to be going into Edmonton, and Edmonton's buses have that outfit, has there been any discussion about how we have to have uniformity across all the buses in the entire system? I know that's not specific to do with COVID, but just because it was brought up. Have we priced that in there? I know it's an expensive cost, but was that even considered when we went into regionalization of transit?
So I can comment that that has never been a specific detail that's been discussed, the Regional Transit Service Commission from the working team perspective, other than it being part of the asset transfer discussions, which are not quite finalized.
Okay, because I think that what should be thought about when we have this, because eventually I'm hoping life goes back to some sort of normalcy, is that both that and any other expected safety gear or other outfittings that are going to be done to our buses need to be put into the cost pricing and who's going to be paying for that. Because like $800,000 is not a small sum. And I'm not sure what other things are on the Edmonton buses that may be expected to be put on our buses when it becomes regionalized. So that's just food for thought when we're doing our forward planning and to make sure that we actually have all the expenses included. That's all.
Thank you.
All right. And so I got a note here, if Darlene is still watching, that if you have contact information for where we can get the screens more readily available and more cost effective, then please contact our transit and they can maybe work with Diversified and try to get that done. All right. I just had one more question about the recommendation says that we will just continue to monitor ridership and report the statistics to the EOC on a weekly basis to gauge opportunities to resume conventional scheduling. That leaves me a little nervous because I don't know what you're looking for, because I honestly think that once Alberta Health ends the what are they calling it, the health emergency, and we relax the restrictions on businesses, that's the trigger to go back to regular bus services. I don't want to leave it ambiguous because I want to resume the transit services as fast as we can, and then potentially follow up with resuming the fare so we can start recovering some of the costs. So I'm wondering why you would rather just gauge than just say this is the trigger and we'll go back to normal.
So part of our rationale there was that we did a slight modification a couple of weeks ago where we went to a spring schedule early, which was a fairly onerous process from a process perspective. And indeed, this one is a little bit larger from a process perspective. So what we wanted to do was provide an opportunity not to have it come back too soon or too late by specifying a date. And basically, we would hope to be on top of it as soon as possible with the numbers and then come back to you and say it's valid to come back from a operating perspective. Obviously, if we open up and the stay-at-home rules are lifted and we're transitioning back up into full operations, part of our recovery plan, we would want to change the schedule back. And if fares were introduced, we'd also have to do all of the other changes to have them enter through the front again. So all of it depends on the province's direction primarily. What we did here was just basically give us the opportunity to consider going a little bit earlier if it wasn't mandated by the province.
Okay, I'm just, so you almost, you're saying you're going to follow what the province is doing. See, to me, it should be the province, not ridership numbers that determine. But the motion says ridership.
Well, the province has not determined transit ridership as part of their.
Yeah, I know, but
So-
they're the ones, sorry, I shouldn't, this is not a blame at all. It's the right move, but that has restricted the movement of people through work and stuff. So I feel like when the Alberta Health Order emergency ends, that's when we should go back to full service.
Well, so certainly there's no problem tying it to that. The challenge is we may be able to go back to a more regular service prior
Earlier.
to the province making any sort of recommendation.
Okay. And that's the other thing I had a little bit of problem with the motion is it doesn't actually say this is coming back to council. It says a weekly basis goes to EOC, doesn't even go to the EAC. So council's really has no opportunity to have their voice heard when we want to resume conventional service. Understand what I'm saying, Mr. Scoble?
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, we can amend the motion if you like. So maybe it's amended to the effect that it comes back to council when ridership triggers are met and or Alberta health orders are lifted.
Okay. Cheryl, are you sort of doing that on the fly? Okay. Do you understand what I'm saying, council? Yeah. Is there any more questions? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Mackay.
Just something that's come up in relation to some of our conversation, and maybe it might be directed to Mr. Scoble. In relation to some of the financial impacts that's coming back to us on April 20th, are we looking at, or are we able to defer some of the capital costs related to transit, i.e. New buses, or is that something we're locked into at this particular time? And maybe that's something just to be aware of and come back if you don't have the answer.
Well, I guess I've got a partial answer. We'd have to check further, but the capital program is coming back on April 20th as well as the financial scenarios. So I know there's been a lot of work. I may defer to Tony, but again, buses tend to be like any mobile equipment, fire trucks, what have you. They tend to be a long lead item as well. So you're looking at a year to get these things in. So you know, we probably wouldn't be looking at deferring any fleet replacements and or new buses given the lead times on them, but perhaps I'll defer to Tony on that.
So just to add to that, indeed our commitments for this year have been made and the buses have been delivered. And we have provided the financing team with considerations for deferrals in future purchases, which will be presented to you guys later on, April 20th.
Thank you. That's probably all we can expect at this particular time. I appreciate that.
Any more questions? Seeing none. Cheryl, can you kind of read what you scribbled in there, or even cut and paste it into the chat group here? Is that easy?
I put that the timing of transit commencing its regular schedule be brought forward to council for input and approval.
Does that work for you guys? I thought we were going to mention something about provincial triggers.
Yeah, if I might, I think maybe it should be worded to the effect, like in terms of triggers, that's pretty ambiguous too. Like it would be probably when is it appropriate to go back to the spring schedule we're currently on, that sort of thing. Like it should be defined service levels that we have already for schedules. And then yes, and or lifting of Alberta Health Services.
Emergency,
public health emergency orders.
Okay. Because Mr. Lake, you wouldn't go back to regular conventional schedule until September, right? We would have stayed on this summer schedule anyway, even if we're without COVID, right?
That's correct. We basically, if we're lucky and things get relaxed, we can go back to our spring schedule, which we would run throughout the summer, basically.
Okay, right. So I don't want to say regular schedule. It's just, okay. Sure, how's it looking?
Getting it ready.
Thank you. Sorry about this. It's hard to do through Zoom. We have 10 minutes to finish this meeting and get on to the Community Growth and Infrastructure Standing Committee. When Cheryl's done typing, do I have a volunteer to move the motion? Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. All things transit.
Just trying to help. So Cheryl, you gonna put it on the chat so I can read it from there?
Yep, I will.
Okay. We'll give you a sec. We're in a rush. We have 10 minutes. That's lots of time.
Can I ask, well, it's not really a question, maybe an observation and not part, but it's part of our conversations. I'm assuming that you mentioned, Mr. Lake, that Strathcona has done this, Edmonton's done this. Is this something that we're seeing like all across Canada?
Yeah, certainly service reductions to meet social distancing was one of the first moves. And then through the duration of that, when transit ridership dropped, people are doing the same thing. Just from a cost perspective, we are in parallel with our other providers.
Yeah. Councillor Broadhead, from a national perspective, have there's been any talk from your organization around what recovery looks like for transit?
Well, good question, Councillor Mackay. Right now, what the National Association has been doing is putting together a request to the federal government in terms of covering lost costs.
Sorry, that's probably the Prime Minister now, right?
So the question was just in terms of putting together the request for support to the industry. So that's one part of it. In terms of business resumption planning, that's part of it as well. But each property has to do a lot of it on their own right. So, but it's not that they haven't talked about it. Been on a number of conference calls nationwide around this over the last couple of weeks. And as much as we're struggling with how we provide service in a hugely reduced demand time, and yet there are still those who truly need it because they got no alternative. It's a struggle no matter what, because you've got this idea of a service being provided when there's no need, but it's not that the need is absolutely gone. It's just reduced tremendously, but those that need it still need it. So how do you meet those needs? And I think that's what we were struggling with a little bit today. So,
I agree.
And then the whole logistics of ramping back up. It's a challenging logistics, but I know that Dustin and Anthony got it all in hand. It'll be like that.
Yes, Anthony's locked in his bedroom working on it.
Well, I'm just waiting on the $400 million that CUDA has applied to the federal government for. So that would be good. Yeah.
Okay, Ray or Wes, the motion is in the chat. Why don't you read it aloud so anyone watching YouTube and later on can understand what the motion is?
Okay, fair enough. I recommend that as of April 27th, 2020, transit operations converts to a modified transit schedule for weekday operations similar to the weekend and holiday schedule. And secondly, that transit administration monitor ridership and report those statistics to the Emergency Operations Center on a weekly basis to gauge opportunities to resume conventional scheduling. And third, that when it is appropriate to commence regular transit ridership based on provincial direction, this be brought forward to council for input and approval.
Excellent. All right, I will accept that motion and let you have some opening comments, Wes.
Well, simply we're in unique times for sure. And the requirements to self-distance and to respond to the risk of COVID-19 require unique activities. And the reduction of services is simply prudent on our part to manage just the costs in light of this reduced demand. So I think the motions here are to reduce it, but when it's time, bring it back so that we can consider when it is appropriate to resume normal schedules.
Excellent. So before we actually go any further, Mr. Lake says, does this allow us to go back to spring schedule without provincial commitment? I think it's council. The way I read it is council would, yeah, give you that direction. Just based on what the province is doing, we would direct you to resume earlier. Is that how you would interpret, Mr. Scoble?
I think we can interpret that way. It's still a little gray. Like I go back to I guess the second motion on the floor there, you know, that we would take looking for opportunities going to the EOC.
And the third one,
I could suggest again that the third motion be modified when it's appropriate to commence regular transit ridership based on ridership, when it is appropriate to commence appropriate seasonal transit services based on ridership and or based on provincial direction, perhaps. Because again, we would, regular transit, we could say our regular seasonal transit when we go back to our summer schedule.
Yeah, because I mean, the last line says for council, to council for input and approval. It's council that's going to make the decision, not the province, based on whatever's going on in the province.
Right. And as Mr. Lake said, perhaps it would be warranted to increase service levels before the orders are lifted as well, right?
Yeah. Okay, so as long as we have that understanding, is there anyone else want to weigh in on debate? I'm seeing heads shaking. Anything to close, Councillor Broadhead?
Nothing further, Madam Mayor.
Call for the vote. That is 7 hands in the air. That's awesome. That's done. We'll go quickly to Councillor Mackay is going to make a motion to change can you read it, Cheryl? I know what was done earlier.
That the start time of the April 20th, 2020 regular council meeting be changed from 2 p.m. to 12 noon.
All right. Can you make that motion, Ken?
Yeah.
All right.
I do so make the motion. You don't want me to repeat it?
No, it's okay.
That's great. Sheena's got a comment.
Do you have anything to?
No, if you've accepted it?
Yeah.
Or is there questions?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Councillor Hughes.
So was there any discussion about just having an extra council meeting or doing it like, I don't know if we have one after the 20th, if it's not scheduled or not, or if we had one like the Monday and Tuesday to break it up. I'm just concerned that we can start at noon, but 8 hours later, you're exhausted. You're not thinking necessarily as well as you would be if we just did it in 2 sessions. Was there any discussion about just having a second additional meeting?
We didn't have a discussion about having 2 meetings, but we did take some things off the agenda. One of them, sorry, Councillor Jolly, was the Public Art Committee. We moved it to a little bit later, so yeah, we did try to get the agenda down so it won't be an 8-hour meeting, but we just thought we would start earlier.
Okay, I just, as an idea, just if we have these type of long meetings, especially because everything else has been canceled, we easily could come back on a Tuesday or Wednesday and finish it off as well. Like if this has to continue and we have one of these marathon things, that might be a discussion agenda committee wants to have, is to think about doing it in 2 different blocks instead of having to do it all at once. Because we have to do Mondays normally because we have other committees, but we don't have other committees right now, and certainly not during the day that we couldn't fit it in. So
yeah, I am sensing that even though we're not meeting in person, my calendar's getting full with virtual meetings. So, but yes, that's not a bad idea because you do get tired after a long council meeting session. All right. Any more comments on starting at noon? Seeing none, I'm going to call for the vote. That is unanimous. All right. Meeting adjourned, and it is 1:30. So Cheryl, I'm sure we have to log into the other link for the committee meeting, do we not?
That is correct, and I'll get.
Okay, so you're gonna have to leave this one.
Okay, bye.
And we'll join in right away because I think the public's waiting for at 1:30 to start, but Councillor Watkins can maybe give us a 5-minute break if you have to go to the bathroom. So it's really just Wes, Jackie, and Ray that are needed there, but everyone else is welcome. Okay, bye.
Hi.